Cancer is a long journey. It's overwhelming, but you just have to put your mind.
If you want to eat healthy, feel your fat, you've got to try Kachava. Kachava is the world's healthiest all-in.
It is a scene reminiscent out of the Cold War, and the message will be clear. Yeah, three Russian warships and a nuclear power submarine arrived in Cuba a few hours ago. They're taking part in planned military exercises in the Caribbean, but the real goal is actually a projection of strength by Russia on the world stage. It's been very closely watched by the US, and it comes amid rising tensions between Washington and Moscow over, of course, the war in Ukraine. Yeah, CNN's Patrick Ottman joins us now live from Havana. Patrick, this would be a conversation reminiscent of something we would have been discussing decades ago, and yet here we are. The U.S., we know, has been monitoring these ships very closely. Talk about the significance of it, and U.S. intelligence doesn't believe that these ships are armed with nuclear weapons, nonetheless, just 90 miles off of the coast of Florida.
Just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, and only about 50 yards from where I'm standing. Right behind me there are the four Russian naval ships that came into the port of Havana this morning. The ship directly behind me is a rescue ship, an icebreaker, which does not have much use in the Caribbean. And then behind that is the nuclear-powered Starlink Kazan, something Cubans say they've never seen before in this country. A nuclear-powered submarine coming in for all to witness in the port of Havana. Really something quite unusual. And then beyond is the Gorshkov, which is one of the most modern military ships capable of firing cruise missiles that Vladimir Putin possesses. A really highest level of technology that the Russian Navy can boast. So those are all they're docked in the area. You would have seen American cruise ships, but because of U.S. sanctions, they're no longer allowed to come here. And right before we came on air, here the sailors singing the Russian national anthem. So it certainly felt like a moment from the past. It wasn't that long ago, of course, that Soviet Union supplied Cuba with everything they needed here, and the economy was doing much better as a result. We have seen some of that come back over the last few years with the war in Ukraine, where Vladimir Putin, in exchange for Cuban support in that war, has sent more oil, food, Russian tourists here these days, and that is helping Cuba as the economy is.
National security, military analyst, and international relations expert Rebecca Grant. Rebecca, good morning to you. So this is President Biden's fourth G7 summit. How does this one matter, and what?
Got a teacher in Virginia as part of his lawsuit against the school board that fired him. He got the axe for failing.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Just a few things at the top here, and then happy to dive into your questions. Today, Secretary Austin is traveling to Brussels to host the 23rd Ukraine Defense Contact Group tomorrow, June 13th. The Secretary will be joined by the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General C.P. Brown, and senior military officials from nearly 50 nations to discuss the ongoing war in Ukraine and encourage continued support from the international community to provide the Ukrainians with the means necessary to defend their sovereign territory. Also, while he's in Brussels, Secretary Austin will participate in the NATO Defense Ministerial on June 14th at NATO headquarters. And now switching to a few operational updates on the temporary pier or the joint logistics over-the-shore capability that is being used to surge humanitarian assistance into Gaza. As you know, for 2 days, the temporary pier was not operational due to high sea state. As of yesterday, June 11th, U.S. Central Command resumed the delivery of humanitarian assistance into Gaza with more than 500 metric tons of aid delivered to the marshalling area, and today delivered another over 500 metric tons as well to the marshalling area. In total, since May 17th, Central Command assisted in the delivery of more than 2,500 metric tons, or approximately 5.6 million pounds of humanitarian aid to the shore for onward distribution. Additionally, the one remaining Army vessel that was beached in Gaza on May 25th was recovered last night, and we greatly appreciate the IDF's assistance with recovery of that vessel. Switching gears, the National Guard is wrapping up its largest annual cyber exercise this weekend at Virginia Beach. Exercise Cyber Shield 2024 brings together nearly 1,000 participants from National Guard units in 41 states and territories, 27 defensive cyber operations elements, 9 international partner nations, and the active duty Air Force with a focus on defending critical infrastructure against cyber threats. Building off the DoD's 2023 cyber strategy, exercises like Cyber Shield 2024 are leveraging industry-leading courses and force-on-force cyber attack simulations to grow collaborative and interoperable capabilities among local, state, national, and international partners for unified defense and all-domain deterrence. And finally, Abe Denmark, the Secretary's Senior Advisor for AUKUS, is departing the Pentagon. We want to thank Abe for his leadership building strong coalitions, bringing us even closer to 2 of our closest allies, the UK and Australia, and for strengthening
Japanese knives are modern-day samurai swords. One knife can glide through a bluefin tuna.
Russia is claiming that it has taken control of one more village in Ukraine's Donetsk region. The name of this village is Staromy Ostrov. This is where it is on the map. There have also been strikes in other parts of Ukraine. In Kharkiv, Ukrainian rescuers managed to save a man who was buried under the rubble after Russian fire hit a residential area.
managed to shoot down a Ukrainian MiG-29 fighter jet. The Kremlin also claims to have intercepted Neptune anti-ship missiles. And Ukraine, on the other hand, says it has managed to hit a Russian oil refinery. Ukraine officials claiming the Novoshakhtinsk oil refinery in Russia's Rostov Oblast was struck on the 5th of June. Ukraine claims the attack destroyed 1.5 million tons of oil and oil products. In fact, Kiev estimates the loss to be worth $540 million. Also, in a first, the White House has officially confirmed that Ukraine has used American weapons to hit Russian territory not too far from the war zone. Belarus and Russia are conducting a nuclear drill. This is the second stage of the tactical drill. Now, Russia says these drills are meant to ensure that the two countries are ready to protect their sovereignty, adding that European provocation necessitates these exercises. Remember, Russian President Vladimir Putin has not taken lightly West's decision to arm Ukraine with long-range missiles that are capable of hitting deep within Russia. During the ongoing exercises, troops from both the countries are expected to work on the combat use of non-strategic nuclear weapons. This comes at a time when a Russian nuclear submarine, along with Russian warships, have docked in Havana, Cuba. Visiting Cuba is Russian frigate Gorshkov, fleet oil tanker Pershing, the rescue tug Nikolai Chika, and nuclear-powered submarine Hazar. These ships and submarines are fitted with long-range missiles like the Caliber and Sitcom that are capable of striking as far as New York, Washington, D.C., and Chicago. America is on alert. U.S. media, in fact, reporting that American ships have already been deployed and tasked with shadowing the Russian warships. Reports say 2 American destroyers have been tasked into action, as have 2 other ships that tow sonar equipment. Back in Ukraine, Kiev is preparing for an offensive. This is Vadim Tukharevsky. He is Ukraine's commander of drone forces. This is a new force that Ukraine has created, by the way, keeping in mind the changing nature of the warfare, also keeping in mind Ukraine's hits and misses. We told you just yesterday how Ukrainian drones have managed to hit one of Russia's stealth fighter jets, the Sukhoi Su-57. NATO calls it the Phallos. Ukraine managed to strike this jet on the tarmac of an airbase in the Astrakhan region. We have high-resolution images of the damage. Like we've been telling you, this is almost 600 kilometers from the front line. The question is, will it add to the growing tension in the sea? Will Russia retaliate by striking deep into Ukrainian land? Will it become a logistic versus logistic warfare? Ukraine is already drawing up a plan for this possibility. It is drawing up a plan to secure the US-made F-16 that Kiev will be received from its European allies. The plan is to house some of these fighter jets in air bases outside Ukraine, meaning chances are these jets will be in a NATO hangar. But is that a foolproof plan? What if Russia does not shy away from striking a non-Ukrainian air route? Just look at what Finland is claiming. It says a Russian jet violated Finnish airspace. As per Finland's defense ministry, the Russian fighter jet flew into Finland's airspace on Monday. The jet allegedly entered 2.5 kilometers into Finland's territory.
How does the best basketball player of all time make more money in his retirement than when he was playing?
What's more, the Russian military jet stayed in Finland's airspace for about 2 minutes. The airspace violation reportedly happened in the eastern part of the Gulf of Finland. This is the first Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Gravitas. It's 9 p.m. IST and we are coming to you live from the WION headquarters in Noida, India. I'm Molly Gambhir. Let's get started. Vladimir Putin has attacked Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown. Russia is also strengthening its air defense in Crimea. As Putin's punishment for Ukraine continues, we tell you what's happening in the war zone. We also ask, does the G7 even have a plan to manage Russia? Here's a look at what else is lined up for you on the show tonight. Tibet is back on America's agenda. American lawmakers have passed a bill that challenges Chinese disinformation on Tibet. We tell you all that you need to know. We get you up to speed with the latest on the Kuwait fire tragedy, in which over 40 Indians were killed and more than 50 injured. We tell you all about a move to bring Thailand closer to China, quite literally. With Thailand planning to expand its rail network, we tell you all about the new rail link that aims to make train travel between Bangkok and Beijing a reality. All this and more coming up tonight on Gravitas. Stay tuned. Vladimir Putin has struck Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown. Ukraine says this was the deadliest attack in weeks. We told you last night how Russia is punishing Ukraine. With this deadly Russian ballistic missile strike, Putin's punishment for Ukraine continues. Let's first tell you more about the damage caused on the ground. The Russian strike on Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown killed at least 8 people and left more than 20 injured. This is the place I'm talking about. Kryvyi Rih in southern Ukraine. It lies in the industrial Dnipropetrovsk region. The attack damaged an administrative building and an apartment block. The Ukrainian leader posted video footage, in fact, from the scene of the attack, showing rescue workers looking through the debris for the survivors, with smoke billowing from a destroyed building. This is what the Interior Minister Igor Klimenko said on social media. I'm quoting, "The death count has risen to 8 people. At least 21 people were injured, including 2 children. Another 4 people are missing." Russia, in fact, is also strengthening its air defense in Crimea. As per reports, it is moving to secure the strategic Kerch Bridge, which connects Russia to Crimea with its latest and most capable S-500 air defense system. In case you weren't aware, the strategic Kerch Bridge connects the Russian mainland to the Crimean Peninsula. It is regularly used by Russia to transport troops and arms to Crimea. Basically, the bridge is always in use and has a lot of strategic significance. According to Ukraine's military intelligence chief, Kirill Budanov, Russian forces have installed their latest S-500 air defense system in Crimea. Let me quote from what he said as per reports. The Russian air defense system is being strengthened. This is quite obvious and understandable. The newest elements of the S-500 have appeared. In principle, this will be their experimental application, but they have already appeared there in Crimea. Budanov, like I said, is the head of the Ukrainian military intelligence service and has been a major figure in the conflict, of course. What he said is extremely significant. You see, the S-500 is Russia's latest and most capable air defense system. The Ukrainian General Staff announced earlier that Ukraine's military had destroyed 2 radars of the S-300 and S-400 air defense systems in several areas of Crimea. Basically, if what Budanov has said is really happening, it will mean that with Ukraine targeting Russia's air defenses in Crimea, Russia is not taking any chances. It is leaving no stone unturned to protect the critical facilities in Crimea and is deploying its most capable air defense system. But will this prove to be a game changer remains the question. Just for context here, the S-500 is Russia's most advanced long-range anti-aircraft system. It is designed to complement the existing S-400 systems and provide a new level of missile defense. According to the US Department of Defense, the S-500 is designed to intercept short to medium-range threats. Another crucial element is its purported ability to neutralize threats across different altitudes and speeds. The system can reportedly defend against ballistic, cruise, and hypersonic threats. According to Russia, it is the most advanced anti-missile system in the world. It has hailed the S-500 anti-aircraft missile system as one that remains unmatched globally. So Russia is clearly preparing for the worst. What about Ukraine? Following the latest Russian strike on Zelensky's hometown, which has been targeted by Russian forces throughout the invasion, Zelensky called on Ukraine's allies to step up deliveries of sophisticated aerial batteries to ward off Russian aerial attacks. He said, and I'm quoting, "Modern air defense systems can provide maximum protection for people, our cities, and our positions, and we need them as much as possible." But are his allies listening is the question. But then what other option does Ukraine even have at this point, apart from calling on its allies to do more? You see, what we have told you about is just the damage on the ground as a result of that strike. In symbolic terms, the damage is a lot more. Like I said, Russia's punishment for Ukraine continues to strike. And from the looks of it, it will only get worse. So that's what's happening in the war zone. Let's just zoom out now and go to the Apulia region in Italy. That's where the leaders of the G7 countries are meeting for their annual summit. G7 is short for Group of Seven. It is an informal grouping of industrialized democracies, namely the United States, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the UK. The European Union also participates in all the discussions. It is represented by presidents of the European Council and the European Commission. The G7 meets every year to discuss issues concerning the economy, geopolitics, global security. There is no doubt that the war in Ukraine would be high on the agenda. After all, the G7 members, most of whom are also part of the NATO, have been the staunchest supporters of Ukraine. But then here's the big question. Does the G7 have a solid plan for Ukraine? The bloc claims it does. The plan is to use frozen Russian assets to fund Ukraine defense. In fact, the US has come up with this idea. You see, when the war started, the G7, along with the European Union, froze Russian assets worth $325 billion. What do you do with these assets? International law does not allow these countries to confiscate Russian assets, and so they found loopholes. What the G7 is planning to do now essentially is to give money to Ukraine in loans by using the interest on Russian assets. You get the plan? And through this scheme, the G7 members will be basically able to give around $50 billion to Ukraine. 50 billion. This money will be dispersed through multiple channels and it will go towards Ukraine's military, budget, and the country's reconstruction work. Now, apart from this, G7 leaders are also expected to make separate announcements. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will reportedly be announcing up to $309 million towards Ukraine's energy and humanitarian needs. US President Joe Biden is expected to sign a security agreement with Ukraine. Through this agreement, Washington will commit to supply military assistance to Kiev for 10 long years. And what do you think explains this long timeline? In one word, fear. Here's a question. What happens if former US President Donald Trump wins the November election? Will he continue to support Ukraine? And here's another question. Does this agreement that Biden is signing with his Ukrainian counterpart really guarantee all-weather support for Kiev? No, it does not. You see, this is an agreement, not a treaty. The US Congress will not be ratifying or giving a formal consent to this commitment, which essentially means that over the next 10 years, any future president can choose to walk out of this agreement. Which then brings me back to the question, does the G7 really have a solid plan? Even after the $50 billion loan is signed, what stops Russia from escalating its offensive? From sending more missiles and drones to strike Ukraine? How many of you know that Russia once belonged to the Forum? G7 was G8, but in 2014, Russia annexed Crimea. Soon, it was thrown out of the bloc. And that, by the way, did not stop Russia from waging a full-blown war on Ukraine. We just showed you how Russia is striking deep into Ukraine. Zelensky's hometown has been hit. Russian President Putin is also threatening to punish countries that are arming Ukraine with long-range missiles. We also have visuals of the Russian warship and nuclear submarine in Cuba. Let's play them out for you. This is Russia sending a message to Ukraine's allies as they shake hands in Italy's Apulia. This is where the region is on the map. Puglia is in the southern peninsular part of Italy. Before the Greeks came to Apulia, the region used to be inhabited by the Lapygians or the Apulians. Over various periods in history, Puglia was ruled by ancient Romans, the Byzantines, the Aragonese, and the Spanish. Puglia is home to golden beaches, crystal clear water, picturesque landscape, and delicious food. As the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, hosts the G7 leaders there in Puglia, her government will ensure that no stone is left unturned as far as their hospitality is concerned. Also, you must know that leaders from a whole host of other countries outside the G7 are also attending that summit. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is flying down to Puglia. Ukraine Zelensky is also in Puglia, as are leaders from Brazil, Argentina, Turkey, the UAE, Kenya, Algeria, Tunisia. This is where the leaders are meeting, the Borgo Ignazia Luxury Resort. It is midway between Brindisi and Bari. The five-star resort has 6 restaurants. One of them has a Michelin. There's also a spa and multiple swimming pools. The resort is built in Pulian style using white yellow stones. The rooms here have pure white walls, low lightings. The rooms here also cost around $1,400 a night. Meaning, if you want to stay here, you will have to shell out a minimum of $110,000 per night just on room rent. But if you can afford this luxury, then you will be treated like a king. Candles will line every passage. Every night, a large pot of rose petals and salt will be left in your room for your baths, to forget your worries, or de-stress after a day of negotiations on how best to stop Russia's war on Ukraine. This is Massimo Bottura. He is a 3-star Michelin chef, and he will be hosting the leaders in the luxury resort in Puglia. Bottura plans to serve them the ultimate comfort food, and his signature dish, the crunchy part of the lasagna. Also on the menu is beef from Piedmont, cooked with truffles and Barolo wine, Sardinian lobster, risotto, Venetian fish, soup with streamed crab, clams, mussels, shrimp, tomato-flavored ice cream. There is someone who will be missing out on the delicious menu, though. The Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. He will be skipping the G7 summit because he will be overseeing the works of the Hajj season. But as rest of the leaders gather in Italy and talk about the war in Ukraine, there is a report that says less than 3% of the G7 military spending could help end global hunger and solve the global South debt crisis. Oxfam International's head of inequality policy, Max Lawson, said, and I'm quoting here, "Governments are finding their pockets run deep to fund war today. But when it comes to stopping starvation, they are suddenly broke. We are talking about a small commitment with the potential for huge impact. Imagine a world where no one goes to bed hungry, and where countries in the global south can put money into public schools and hospitals instead of debt interest payments. The G7 not only has the means, but the moral and strategic imperative to make this happen," quote unquote. And Lawson is right. The G7, after all, has the means, but the big question is, does it have the will? As Ukraine burns, Gaza suffers, and tensions continue to escalate in the Red Sea and the Taiwan Strait, a near-forgotten plateau of conflict has suddenly returned to America's agenda: Tibet. Tibet, an independent nation till China's Mao Zedong's communists sent an army to annex it in 1950, using the dubious excuse that Tibet had been part of China since ancient times, a claim which Tibetans led by the Venerable Dalai Lama vehemently oppose. This week, American lawmakers passed a Tibet policy bill. What this bill essentially does is challenge Chinese disinformation on Tibet. We start off with the basics here. This is the bill. It's called the Promoting a Resolution to the Tibet-China Dispute Act. Now have a look at what this bill says. Number 1, the claims made by China and the Chinese Communist Party that Tibet has been a part of China since ancient times are historically inaccurate. Number 2, the bill asserts that Chinese communists are attempting to destroy Tibet's Buddhism and Buddhist culture, that Chinese policies are systematically suppressing the ability of the Tibetans to preserve their religion, culture, language, history, way of life, and environment. Number three, China has not engaged in meaningful dialogue with the Dalai Lama, and hence it is failing to meet the expectations of the United States. The Dalai Lama, then just 24 years old, managed to flee brutal Chinese oppression against him and Buddhist lamas in Lhasa, barely managed to save his life, and sought and got asylum in 1959. Number four, the bill asks American diplomats to counter disinformation about Tibet. This makes it incumbent upon American diplomats to work actively against China on the Tibet issue in all their missions. And this includes countering disinformation on the people of Tibet. The history of Tibet, Tibetan institutions, including the institution of the Dalai Lama, who is the highest spiritual leader in Tibet, and also the head of Tibetan Buddhism. So this is what the bill states. The American government must demand by the law of the land to insist on a dialogue between the Dalai Lama and the Chinese authorities, which, by the way, has not happened since 2010. Now, it's not a question of whether America will succeed. What is extremely important here is that American diplomats must put Tibet back on the agenda. China believes that it has buried the conflict over Tibet, that it has been forgotten by the world, and indeed, it seemed so. That amnesia is over. So let's just look at the bigger picture here. Let's look at the vital details buried in the fine print. The international Tibet movement for freedom from China has got a major boost. The Dalai Lama, who lives in Dharamshala in the Indian Himalayas, is the mentor and also is the mentor of a government that looks after the interests of the Tibetans, driven from their homeland, has got a new spur. China condemns the Dalai Lama in the worst abusive language regularly, by the way. America has sent a signal that it is ready to be a friend of the Tibetans again. And this reopens a flashpoint. This bill was tabled by a Democratic senator from Oregon. His name is Jeff Merkley. Both the houses of the Congress have now passed the bill. What happens next? Before we answer that, let's quickly go back in history. Tibetans have never accepted that they are part of China. Chinese troops massacred Tibetans in 1959 when they conquered Lhasa. This was a year after the proclamation of the People's Republic of China. Mao Zedong said that the so-called liberation of Tibet was his top priority when no Tibetan wanted to be liberated by the Chinese. This conquest was codenamed Chamdo by the Chinese armed forces in 1950. And since then, Tibet has been suppressed as a colony of China. This operation was codenamed Chamdo. As I just said, the PLA crossed the Dinsha or the Yangtze River and it entered Kham in the early hours of October 7. Tibet had a small, ill-equipped army. It was no match to the PLA's might. By October 19, the town of Chamdo had fallen. 3,000 Tibetans were made prisoners.
Every year, 28 million people are trafficked globally. The Your Roads, Their Freedom campaign seeks to raise awareness in the transport industry. Truck and bus drivers, be vigilant on the roads. If you see something suspicious, text 233-733 or BEFREE.
The defeated governor of Chamdo was forced to go to the 24-year-old Dalai Lama with a proposal to accept the annexation. The Dalai Lama refused, with the Chinese army at their throat, with guns killing unarmed civilians at random. Tibetans did not have a chance or a real choice. The Chinese assured the Tibetans that the latter's culture and religion would be protected. This has not happened. The Chinese destroyed Buddhist monasteries. They imposed their communist system on Buddhist schools. In short, China started turning Tibet into a replica of communist China. And this fueled resistance, which erupted full scale in the year 1959 in Lhasa. Defenseless Lhasa was shelled,
the Dalai Lama fled Lhasa and reached the Indian border in Arunachal Pradesh on the 30th of March, 1959. And as he was being escorted to Tawang in India's Arunachal Pradesh, the young Dalai Lama publicly asserted that he was Tibet's sole legitimate representative and that the Chinese were usurpers and invaders. Around that time, Dwight Eisenhower was serving his second term as the president of the US. America decided to help the Tibet resistance movement, and this obviously had to be done covertly. I have with me a very interesting telegram that was sent from the US Embassy in India to the US Department of State ahead of Eisenhower's December 1959 visit to India. Let me read out some portions for you. I'm quoting. I have informed Foreign Secretary Dutt that we had received informal request for interview Dalai Lama with President from former's New Delhi office. Dutt replied that he thought it would be most unfortunate if the Dalai Lama should attempt to be present